Hey guys, before I start, I wanted to make sure I give credit where credit is due. I did most of my research from the Ocmulgee Mounds National Historic Park website and resources, lostworlds.org, and the National Park Service website and resources, thanks to them. We often talk about ancient worlds, as ancient civilizations, as being very far away from us and having nothing to do with us. They're really far away, like Egypt, for example, or in Mesopotamia, which is in modern-day Turkey, Iran, and Syria. Çatalhöyük, which is in modern-day Turkey. These are really far away from us and have nothing to do with us. But the truth is there were many civilizations thriving in North and South America. Thriving means doing really well, around the same time as those civilizations, if not before. In fact, not only were there civilizations and societies living in North and South America, there were civilizations and societies living here in Georgia. Okay, and we have evidence of them. So, for example, in Cartersville, Georgia, there are the Etowah Mounds. In Blakely, Georgia, there are the Kolomoki Mounds. In Eatonton, Georgia, there are the Rock Eagle Effigy Mounds. And out by Ellijay, Georgia, there's Fort Mountain. The place, though, that I wanted to talk about is down in modern-day Macon, Georgia, and they are the Ocmulgee Mounds. The Ocmulgee Mounds is right on the Ocmulgee River, you might remember, and it contains at least 5 major mounds that we know about. The Earth Lodge, the Cornfield Mounds and Trenches, Funeral Mound, the Lesser Temple Mound, and my favorite, the Great Temple Mound. The Great Temple Mound stands about 90 feet above the Ocmulgee River down below and about 56 feet above the plateau where the village had been. And back in the day when it was first built, it was even higher than that, so that's pretty impressive. There's also the remains of a trading post built by the British in around 1690. The British built it to trade with the Native Americans that they named the Creek Indians. So why mounds? Well, no one really knows, to be honest. Obviously, we've talked about why is it important to have the high ground. It's easier to defend, and it's easier to see, and safer, and that kind of thing. And that's all true. If you have, in this case too, if you have a high mound, you're able to create a signal fire. Then it can be seen from much further away, or you can see other people's signal fires if you're up higher. Obviously, too, some of the mounds have religious meaning, but no one is really quite sure how they fit into the daily practice and worship of the Native Americans that live there. So, why mounds? Why not? So, the Ocmulgee Mounds, the area of the Ocmulgee Mounds, has been occupied by humans for 12,000 years. 12,000 years. Why do I say it like that? Because it is the oldest civilization that we are looking at this year. Çatalhöyük, you say, in all its Neolithic splendor? I'm sorry. Çatalhöyük is only 9,500 years old. The ancient civilization and society that lived out in Macon, Georgia, is older than Chattahoyuk. Right? So the first people that came into this area were nomadic hunters, and they were hunting big game, big mammals like the sloth, the giant sloth, the mastodon, the mammoth, that kind of thing. And the reason that we know they were here was because of the artifacts and the fossils left behind. There's a specific artifact called a Clovis spear point. That particular one is broken, and it's not unusual to find broken ones, but it is also not unusual to find them all over the country, North and South America, as a matter of fact. These people spread their culture from South America to North America and all over, and the reason that we know they were the same is because of the spear points, broken or not. They are made in the same way, using the same techniques, the same type of materials, and they're consistent throughout North and South America, and they're consistent on the dating record when they're dated, usually using carbon dating or some other type of dating method. They're called Clovis spear points because the first one was found in Clovis, New Mexico. Go figure. The Clovis people we could do a whole class on. We're not going to. I'm going to let it just kind of lie at this. There's a lot of question about the Clovis people. So, who were the people that lived at the Ocmulgee Mounds? Well, they were a people that spoke the language, in the language family Muskogean. They were Muskogean speakers. And there is an ancient tribe called the Kusatah that have a legend that might help explain who these people were and where they came from. And the legend was that there were people living out west, and there was an earthquake, and the earthquake swallowed up their children. So they left, and they came east, and they walked, and they walked, and they encountered volcanoes. And they continued to walk and walk until they finally traveled so far east that they came to an area that was already occupied by tribes called the Chickasaw, the Atacama, and the Obuka. And this is where they say the Muskogean speakers sat down, and that is common among Native American tribes. When they are done walking and they find their place to live, they sit down. They sat down at that spot, which is now Ocmulgee Mounds. Now, sometimes myths, sorry I dropped my notes, sometimes myths and legends, as we've discovered, are just created to answer questions that can't be answered. But the Kusatah legend might have a little something to it. So let me explain. What's west? Okay, that's a really, open-ended question. Let me just answer it for you. Mexico is west. Do you not agree that Mexico is west of us, right? And Mexico has earthquakes. Mexico has volcanoes. Another thing that's really important, though, is this. That's called maize, M-A-I-Z-E, otherwise known as, you guessed it, corn. Corn agriculture started in Mexico. Guess what they grew at Ocmulgee? And all throughout the country, actually. Yeah, you're right. Maize, corn, they did. They were also part of the corn agriculture. Also, in Mexico, they have flat top pyramids like Chichen Itza. Doesn't the Great Temple Mound sort of look like Chichen Itza, kind of? Also, there are other similarities. There are similarities in the type of tobacco that was grown in Mexico and the type of tobacco that got grown around the Ocmulgee area. There are similarities of the style of dress, the style of pottery, even the language that they spoke was similar. So it's really, really compelling evidence that the ancestors of the Ocmulgee people did come from the Native Americans living in Mexico. So let's now talk a little bit about the mounds themselves, and how they were built. They were built by hand using stone and shell tools and a basket that was kind of worn on the head and rested on the back. So these mounds were built by hand, and some of the theories about who actually built these mounds, a couple. One, they were slaves, other Native Americans that were captured during war times between the villages. I've heard other theories that all the villages came together, Ocmulgee people and all the villages of the woodland Native Americans that lived nearby all came together and helped build these mounds by using stone and shell tools and baskets on their backs. I've heard both theories. My guess is it's probably a combination of the two. In any case, Ocmulgee was a rich and thriving village, a very successful village. At its height, it housed 1,000 people. This isn't even talking about the people in the neighboring villages or people who lived outside of that particular village. This was just in the village itself, 1,000 people. That's pretty amazing. It's also situated on right in the middle of two different trading routes, the coastal plain and the Piedmont. Which should sound a little bit familiar to you. In other words, this civilization was right in the middle of people coming in from the coast and people going out towards the coast doing their trade, and they were right in the middle. And so they really took advantage of that. Unfortunately, around 1250 CE, Ocmulgee was abandoned and nobody really knows why. About 100 years later, about 100 miles downstream or so, the Lamar people created a new civilization similar to the Ocmulgee people, but not quite as vast and as big. And they were actually there when Hernando de Soto and his men encountered them and then spread European disease to those people, which is something you'll learn about next year, how European explorers nearly destroyed Native American cultures from the tip of South America to the top of North America. You'll learn about that next year. And that is the very brief story of the Ocmulgee Mounds. Hope you liked it. Talk to you later. Bye.